Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for attending. I'm Jona Verber of the Jewish Art Salon, and I want to thank very much Judith Joseph and Dorit Giordano for curating this series, and for Paul for presenting today. We're very excited. Dorit, you take it away.
Welcome to the Jewish Art Salon Open Studios program. Today, we will present Jewish Art Salon member Paul Salmon. Following Paul's presentation, there will be time for questions and comments. Please type your questions into the chat and we will call on you to ask. Time is limited, so please be sure you are asking questions. Paul's presentation will be followed by a gallery of Jewish Art Salon artists. Judith Joseph and I selected the art and wrote commentary about the work as a response to the ideas. Judith.
Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you all. I'd like to present our speaker today, Paul Salmon. He is a conceptual artist and educator. He is professor of art at Western Michigan University's Gwen Frostic School of Art and an adjunct community professor in the medical ethics, humanities, and law program at Homer Stryker M.D. School of Medicine. He has an active art practice, and his photography has been commissioned, published, and exhibited widely. Go ahead and share your screen, Paul, and welcome.
So first of all, thank you everyone for joining us from different time zones. So good day, buongiorno, and erev tov. And thank you especially Jona, Judith, and Dorit for asking me to share my practice as an artist and educator. Preparing for this occasion has forced me to ask myself, what is most essential to me as an artist and an educator? What really fuels my life? First, it's the simple pleasure of discovery, of novel experiences. It's the gratification of becoming more expert at visualizing, articulating, and making manifest the things that obsess me or I find compelling or awe-inspiring. I strive to contribute to knowledge. I want to help repair the world, the olam, the understood as the concentric worlds that expand outward from oneself to the community, to the planet. All this begins with curiosity. Curiosity kindles creativity. Creativity enables us to contribute to knowledge, to invent our world, invent and reinvent our world. Being curious and creative entails risk-taking, something artists fully understand, but something that frightens many people. The well-known violinist, Albert Einstein, no slouch at physics either, said that curiosity permits us to perceive the, quote, marvelous structure of reality. I have no special talents, he claimed. I am only passionately curious. However, being curious also means being inquisitive or prying, even meddlesome. In Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, 7-year-old Alice chases a rabbit down a rabbit hole. She discovers a bottle that says, "Drink me," which makes her too small to grasp the key on the table there. Later, she finds a cake that says, "Eat me," and strikes her head on the ceiling. Down the rabbit hole is a metaphor for entering the unknown. Her exclamation, "Curiouser and curiouser," means really that's stranger and stranger. Curiosity killed the cat. No wonder so many people fear creativity. We live in a time when knowledge is ridiculed. The people who don't believe in science, won't fund the arts and humanities, and for that matter, don't believe in education, are afraid of knowledge. Why is this? Well, they're afraid because going about obtaining knowledge entails risk, danger from the new, from what's different, from change. Knowledge is experience, defined as direct observation or participating in an event. Hang on, I just got it, okay. The root of the word experience, or experientia in Latin, is per, which means risk. This is the root of the words peril, perilous, and parlous, full of risk or danger. But the truth is, curiosity is more so about care and healing. At the root of the Latin word for curiosity is cura, meaning care, concern, or healing. Curiosity enables us to heal, to care. I think this was probably better understood not too long ago when medicine was called the art of healing. Taking risks can be thrilling for artists and scientists alike. When a scientist, let me see, did I get off the wrong? Yeah, sorry. When a scientist makes a hypothesis, they may be committing themselves to work that will take a year or more and the expenditure of perhaps millions of dollars. The success or failure of a new vaccine may be at stake. Artists take risks, for starters, in just choosing to be an artist. I don't have to explain that to anyone here, that it can be a treacherous path. Those who become artists continue to take risks because this is how we test our ideas and amass the kind of experience that can contribute to knowledge about ourselves and the world. How do we go about creating art? What are the different methods? You know, I had a small epiphany just a few weeks ago when I was standing at this place. It's a settlement called Mitzpe Jericho outside Jerusalem and within sight of the Dead Sea. And it was such a desolate place. And I was struck by the structure, the geology there, which has always fascinated me. And then I played with my iPhone and ended up taking this rather distorted image of this very same scene, you know, not retouched in Photoshop or anything. And this image kept haunting me since I took it these few weeks ago. And I realized that it was reminding me of an image from my my old guidebook to rocks and minerals that I've had since I was a kid. And I realized that there's kind of a metaphorical lesson here about how we make art. You know, there are sedimentary rocks, metamorphic rocks, igneous rocks. In the sedimentary process, rocks are created near the surface and formed largely from living organisms. So think of this as analogous to our process as human beings. It often involves tiny, tiny particles, even those that are microscopic. And then they settle down in layers, carried by wind or more frequently by water. With igneous rocks, you know, these are the more violent creations where they're formed deep in the earth from liquid rocks called magma. And then there are the metamorphic rocks, which are the rocks that have previously existed but have been changed under great pressure or heat. And I think that's probably all of us. I certainly relate to the idea that there's this sediment that exists in my life. It's my history, the things that I've done or not done. And under times of great pressure or heat of some kind, it's transformational. And that is where and how we really make art. You know, like Alice, who went underground, you know, we too have to delve deeply inside ourselves. You know, when I developed a course called The Skilled Observer in Art and Science, it's really about how do we see what's not present on the surface? Whether you're in these slides, medical providers on the left or an artist on the right, it's essential for us to be able to have knowledge. And from that, we often have to intuit what is lying beneath the surface. These are images from this course that I created in 2015 as an elective for the medical school. And it helps medical students and other students in all disciplines see the way that different scientists and artists learn to be more skilled at seeing what is difficult to see, what is under the surface. One of the wonderful things about working at the medical school here as an adjunct professor is collaborating with others. So a doctor approached me with this idea that he had about trying to find a way for medical students who have to study histology, that is the structure of cells. It's a difficult skill to learn. How do you identify these different conditions that cells have in different kinds of cells. You're seeing some examples on the screen here. So he and I talked about the possibility of, well, we wonder if the skill involved in identifying cell structure might be analogous to what we do when we look at fine art. And could we help the medical students by training them in identifying styles of painting? For example, a Braque and a Picasso can look awfully similar. And how can you learn to identify them? Or here, this is a really challenging one, where on the left you have a Seurat and on the right you have a Signac. And can that knowledge transfer over into other fields? So we're working on that right now. Another way for an artist, importantly, I think, to look at what's hidden is look into our own hidden lives. When someone is 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, they tend to be much less inhibited. I know for me, I was in my own little world. And just did what I came across. It's kind of like the kid in this illustration. Recently, I found this old film clip of me looking at a camera as a very little one. And I began experimenting with electricity, chemistry, collecting rocks and butterflies, rocks, minerals, and butterflies. And what was also quite important for me was that I lived about a 10-minute drive from Thomas Edison's laboratories. And my mother would often take me there. And when I was a little boy, there were men who had actually known Edison. And the way they talked about him and his process, I'm sure it was somewhat romanticized, but I really was overwhelmed, kind of began to worship him and other inventors and scientists and kind of wanted to be like them. This really led to my, interest in being interdisciplinary between the arts and sciences. And finding photography was perfect because photography is a blend of science, particularly then with optics and chemistry that you needed, a blend of science and aesthetics. And, after some time, I launched my career as a photojournalist. Speaking of what's underneath the surface, this artist seen here in Pietrasanta, Italy, I shot this on an assignment for Smithsonian Magazine. And Italy was very influential for me. I had lived there for a year. I just felt that life had a sense of unity that I didn't experience in this country. And the more I photographed, I want to say one thing is that I think one reason I was passionate about photography is I felt safe and protected behind the camera, as I didn't have to engage so much with human beings. I had to learn that skill much later. But I think that's probably analogous to a lot of visual artists who are more comfortable in the studio in a solitary practice. But I think it's important for all of us to learn that ability to engage with people and to be verbal. I'm going to show you 2 photographs from an assignment I did for a German magazine about the Mennonite and the Amish people in Pennsylvania. And the other thing I love about photography was it enabled me to get to know whole communities in a very immersive way. This is a photograph of 4 generations of a family, and the man in the chair at the center, this was his first and last ever time he was photographed. He consented to allow me to photograph him, and really, they welcomed me because they saw me as a representative of the chosen people. They're very devout Christians, and they only allowed me in because of my Jewish identity. And I found that in other places. When I photographed extensively in Eastern Kentucky and Appalachia, the families here, again, they saw me as some kind of chosen person, which I don't think I exploited it, but I took advantage of it. In time, there was actually a particular day when I was photographing in Italy and everything was perfect, but I really felt that I wasn't doing much to help the world. I really wanted to directly help this process of tikkun olam, healing the world. And I really decided it was time to answer this other calling I had to be a teacher. I went back to school, got a graduate degree, and this title, Inventing the World, How Art Creates Reality, it's really the way that I've taught about the arts. And it's the title of the the book that I wrote during the past 2 years. It's an interactive ebook that I'm now using in a variety of courses. I'm hoping that people across the country will begin to use it. These are images, pairs of images that are in the book. So one great thing that teaching, I mean, it's just fulfilling for me to teach because of the engagement I have with young people and some older people in the medical world, medical providers. But also, you know, having a full-time salary and an academic schedule has enabled me to dig more intensively into various creative projects, most of which actually still related to my childhood interests. So I was always fascinated as a kid, the way that sunlight affected things. You know, we'd have a little wading pool and then would move it after a few days, and there'd be this pale disc because photosynthesis was stopped by the blocking of the grass with the pool. And then one day it really was unavoidable. I had to address this thing because I was out camping with my buddy Paolo here, and he fell asleep. I was doing something else, and I came back and he had a pan print. And basically he had done a photogram unwittingly on his body because human skin is a photosensitive material. And I just went with that idea, and that led to this first experiment called Tan Scale, exposing his skin to ultraviolet light sequentially, and then to these more dramatic images I call biracial portraits #1 and #2. And again, the medium here is ultraviolet light applied to skin and just documented with unretouched color photography. And this is a related image in that series that I called The Body as Archive. But after a while, karmically, I felt, God, I don't want to do this to anybody else. They all signed their rights away, you know, that I wouldn't be responsible if anything, they had anything harmful from doing this. So then I ended up spending parts of 3 summers documenting people who got their own designs unwittingly on the beach, on Jones Beach, New York. So here's one. I love this one. I call triple exposure because she apparently wore 3 different bathing suits that summer. Another series had to do with my fascination with inventions that had to do with motion before photography and before motion pictures. This project was called Accordion Fold. And if you look at it closely, the picture in the center is what the piece looks like straight on. It's 2 photographs. I cut them into strips and I put them on this paper that I folded like an accordion. If you looked at the image from the right side, you see the image on the left. If you looked at it from the left side, you see the image on the right. It was very fun to watch people look at it because they'd kind of go like this, you know. And then later, when I first got an iPhone 4, I began playing with that and discovering that the panoramic app there allowed me to do some pretty weird things. And I'll show you a close-up of this here that I discovered. I realized then that the Pano app opens and closes the shutter so many times that it's applying all these different microseconds of this experience. It's almost like making a film. And that delighted me. And then there were places where the camera couldn't get any data. So I call this a digital void, that black area in the lower left corner. And I worked on that idea for like 3 years. And here in the East Coast, California, in Italy, where I often go. This is Midtown Manhattan. But then in terms of overall, you know, I find more and more I'm finding that I'm influenced and finding things that are congruent with my ideas as an artist, as a photographer, as an educator, that are embedded in Judaism. I think, you know, that has to do with, first of all, the richness of Ivrit, of Hebrew, of beginning to learn about the shorishes, the roots of words. It's about the holistic nature of our liturgy and how all things are interrelated and linked to one another in the most fluid ways. Also about the fact that as artists and educators, you know, I think we need to be and are more focused on asking questions than supplying answers. And if there isn't anything that's true about Judaism, And Torah, at least the way I look at it, it's about exploring questions, not, it's more about a question mark than an exclamation point. And then the more you practice Judaism, the more embodied experience it is. I've learned so much about embodied cognition from working with, say, a geoscientist. A geoscientist has to know about what's happening under the ground, but they can't go around drilling 100 holes and say, okay, now we know it's there because we made 100 holes. You can't do that. You have to do some testing, and you have to be there physically. As this geoscientist I know says, you have to touch the rocks, and you put that together, that somatic experience with the data that you know and your lab results. And from there, you have to intuit. I mean, it's the same for the doctors who first confronted the pandemic, the coronavirus. They had a lot of knowledge, they did tests, but at a certain point, you have to make an educated guess and trust your intuition. But the embodiment is extraordinary. Whether it's you put a mezuzah on your doorway and touch it, you're making this human physical contact with, well, you could say with God, certainly, at least with texts that are kind of an intermediary between humans and God. This is a photograph of one of my great uncles who was in Italy at the time, praying with his tefillin on, and he has this text on his forehead and on his hand. So I find that immensely inspiring. We're looking at a page of Talmud provided by the Library of Congress, and it's indicative. We visually see how we take the germ of an idea, a word or a few words or a phrase, and we comment on it, and it's subjective. I think that's the tricky thing for some of my students to begin to understand learning about art, because no, it's not these are not objective facts. Your opinion about this painting is equal in value to the artist, which is a hard concept to accept if depending on how you've been educated. And one other thing that I love about Judaism and my practice and my knowledge of it is, long before Einstein, Judaism has understood the relativity of time and space. I mean, Heschel beautifully summarizes that by saying that on the Sabbath, we build a palace of time. This is an image from the play I wrote that was beautifully staged by a director in New York some years ago, called Aching to Go Home. And it tells a lot of the story of my father's history and his father. And it was important to create a visual of his immersion in his Jewish background, even though he had become more secular. So we created, for the sake of the stage, 2 metal pieces and blank canvas between them. And when the actor lifted them up, we projected the text on that blank space. So I've really gotten through kind of the major points that I wanted to make, and I'm be delighted to hear comments, have questions.
I just want to thank you for that fabulous presentation. You gave us so much to think about, and I'm really fascinated personally with the way that you talked about the somatic aspects of art, the body relationship with art, and you really display that with your photograms on the human body. But I think it's also interesting that it seems that you link that with geology in some way. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of a recent discovery. Just a few weeks ago, I'm out there and I said, holy mackerel, that's really interesting. These, I mean, it came out of my childhood knowledge of rocks.
But the fact that you pointed out that scientists need to kind of be present physically in their own body and feel, if they're geologists, actually feel the rocks and understand the world in that way, that's sort of it sort of fleshes out empiricism. How do we discover things? And I think that's something that all artists can relate to.
Absolutely, we can, and that's really the challenge in medicine today, because it used to be called the art of healing, But today, given the healthcare is dominated by corporations now, and the medical providers are under huge pressure. Artificial intelligence is becoming dominant in that financial scenario, and there's robotics. So when I talk to medical students, I say, if you're going to succeed in this world, you have to double down on your inherently human capacities. And I think that's true of all of us, because we
Absolutely.
are, a lot of people don't know where to go because they use GPS too much.
I mean, this really echoes something my father said. He's a 97-year-old former physician. And he really believes in science, but he also really believes in intuition. And he talks about other doctors that he knew that just had that gift. And I'm wondering, do you think the young doctors in medical school, do you think they understand that?
Well, it's interesting. There've been some changes in the examination process to even get into medical school now. So it deals a little more with the humanities, thank goodness. But, for those students whose education has been, where they've pared away the arts and humanities because they don't think that's what they need to get to medical school, they really need to be, they're brainwashed to an extent. And that's the challenge of working with medical students today.
Well, I think it's great that you're bringing humanity back into, and also the body and the earth back into medical practice, because we all know how important that is when we're sitting across from a doctor, that we feel that they're actually connecting with us in a personal way. I just want to invite, go ahead.
Artists know how important skillful observation is. And so when we see a scene in reality, or whether we're looking at a painting, maybe it's by Munch, we begin to go below the surface and intuit and imagine what this could be about. And those are skills that everyone needs. Certainly a doctor who has to make a diagnosis, talking with the patient, they better have that skill.
And interestingly too, in previous centuries, doctors relied a lot on their sense of smell. So there are a lot of other senses that have sort of gone by the wayside, which are part of how we experience the world as human animals.
There is Hannah want to speak, and then Richard. Hannah, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Thank you. So thank you so much. This was just a fascinating presentation this morning. And what a couple of things that really struck me and really bring together for me this notion of being a biological creature in the universe, as well as sort of how we observe the world. So you talked about this accordion fold and you presented that work. And to me, it was very interesting because, first of all, when I think of accordion fold, I also think of DNA and the doubling back of strands. And so it made me think, well, like, how does this relate to memory? And if we're looking at something, what pieces are we choosing to insert on both sides of that canvas, right? Yeah. And also, why are we coming at it from only a duality, right? So we have a Torah tradition that says that there are a multitude of paths, right? 70 paths to Torah, and all of them are beautiful. We have an art tradition, Walter Benjamin, who says you have to approach something from every direction in order to understand it. And so that piece of it just really, hit for me. And then as you spoke about the geology and this notion of sedimentary and kind of things filtering in from the outside, as well as this deeply innate metamorphic sense of being, what I was thinking is, well, when you have that pressure, right, that changes, that creates that metamorphosis, there has to be some sort of membrane, right? It's analogous to me to a membrane and osmotic exchange.
Yeah.
And so for me, I really was thinking about, well, what is that membrane? And then you started to talk about text, and text as the intermediary between the being and the divine. And so, that's sort of, I'm fascinated. I'm very much interested in looking at your work and hearing more about what you're doing in terms of this and what you're teaching medical students in terms of this notion of constructed reality?
That's gorgeous what you've said. I mean, it really resonates, every word you said. It does remind me to say one other thing about this idea of sedimentary, igneous, and metamorphic in terms of our human dimension, particularly as artists, that there are many times where I've felt pressures of life, things I've done, things I haven't done, that can cause paralysis, or it causes me to move towards some kind of manic, let's say igneous, volcanic state. And sometimes we can process that with our art. Sometimes we actually need to avail ourselves of other kinds of assistance. But anyway, thank you so much for the very visual and emphatic language that you used.
Go ahead, Richard.
Okay, thank you. Anyway, Paul, thank you so much for your presentation. You mentioned early on the notion of risk-taking.
Mm-hmm.
Which my first reaction is that is a modern approach to creativity, and certainly not exclusively such. I mean, when I think about the great Renaissance artists that we all look at, I don't see in them what I would intuit as risk. I would see rather, as a matter of fact, the struggle to try to get out the known from their surrounding the surrounding society and religion. And then I was thinking, well, primitive artists or naive artists are not. It may look like risk-taking from our point of view. From their point of view, again, they're simply trying to get out something they really do know, and they're not they're not walking on thin ice. They want to walk on firm ground. So I think there's obviously different ways to make this creativity work. One other thing I just want to mention, the accordion piece, beautiful piece, to say the least. Yonah Vera made a piece for the Samaritan Show, which is currently in the Museum of the Bible in Washington, which was based on a similar thing, except her accordion was also a Venetian blind. And again, you would either look at it from one side or the other, it would change, or you would move it. And most importantly, what she was doing, she was contrasting two different peoples and religions. Mm-hmm. One, Judaism, and the other, the Samaritans. Very similar, but very different, and using the same form. So just want to mention that.
I'll be in Washington soon. I'll have to go see that exhibit.
Oh, please do. Yes.
And it's interesting, though. Recently, I was in the Museum of Science that bears Galileo's name in Florence. And there's like a Renaissance era piece in which someone basically did an accordion fold. I think they made it a plaster and painted different images on different sides of the ridges. But also just briefly, when you say about risk isn't so much there because people are depicting the real world. And in many ways, I agree. In 35,000 years ago, 25,000 years ago, people in the caves, that was their actual world. And I think their lives depended upon accurately depicting what was there. Anyway, I'll thank you very much for those comments and questions.
Go ahead, Susie.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation, Paul. It was great. My question is about what you said about the Mennonite and Amish communities. And I wondered how you presented your Judaism to them. Was that through your work, and was it to that one intergenerational family, or was it to the community as a whole? Could you talk about that a little?
Yeah, I was uneasy. This German magazine asked me they wanted a story about how the quote unquote Pennsylvania Dutch people celebrated Christmas. Now, there are no Pennsylvania Dutch people, and more observant Mennonites, let alone Amish, they don't do Christmas. There's no lights or Christmas trees or Santa Claus. So I was very gentle in my approach to people. And I just started out with someone who was running a little store. And he said, in our group, we're not really going to be interested. In other words, that would be too much for them. But he referred me to a dairy farmer up the road. And he said that he and the elders in their group would consider this. And I came back a week later and I brought my slide projector and did a little slideshow in someone's barn, showing them previous work I'd done so that I could kind of be transparent about what I do. And in the end, we made a compromise so that, like that picture of the little girl who turned around on her seat in the church, they had, after a lot of discussion, the three elders said, all right, you can bring your camera into our meeting place, our kind of our church. You have to be in the back. You can only photograph when we're singing hymns. So I had my camera on a tripod in the back, but I knew that I kept watching this little girl who was so curious, and she just really wanted to turn around, and eventually she did. So I got the picture,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Johnny, share, and then I think Leona wanted to say something.
I wanted to ask you about your use of light. You use light a lot in your work, and you kind of focus on the external. Can you talk a little bit about the external as well as the internal as you look at light?
Well, first of all, I rarely have to avail myself of artificial light. There are times where one has to. I'm not quite sure what you mean by the internal light.
Well, looking at things from within,
Mm-hmm.
and taking, as you look at things and project outward, how do you see the internal interpretation of what you're doing, which I'm looking at as internal light?
Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, internal light is our heart and brain and our awareness. And I think, when I'm in my best self, one could say in my more enlightened self, it means that I'm observing more fully. I'm aware of people around me. Peripheral vision is incredibly important. Years ago, I assisted a great photographer in Italy, and I would walk about 100 meters behind him, and I began to see that he was seeing things I wasn't seeing because he was using his peripheral vision. I think that's the best I can do with your question.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more comment, and then we're going to proceed to the gallery sharing from Dorit. Leona Strasberg, did you want to unmute and make your observation? It's interesting.
Thanks. Paul, thank you so much for your presentation, and thanks for making sure that I was here. I appreciate it. I just wanted to say, when you were talking about membranes, I was in my mind thinking about membranes, amoeba membranes, the membranes of our cells, the membranes of our skin. And then I thought, well, our membrane, we have a communal membrane, which is the Torah, which is made from skin, which has the words from everything. I just feel like that was, for me, an amazing connection to think about. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And it was Hannah who brought up the word membrane, but I think one can extrapolate from the word membrane, and basically it's a boundary. And I think we all have boundaries. The artist's job is to know when to invade or climb over that boundary, in a way that's right. Particularly, I think, in being a photographer, or videographer, filmmaker, the camera can be very intrusive. But I think that's a big task of any artist, is whether they're using watercolor or a motion picture camera, is how are they going to seize what they perceive and accept certain boundaries, certain limits.
I wasn't thinking of boundaries at all. I was thinking of like membranes that, because we can, through the Torah, have so many different ideas and conceptions and ideas for art. So that's where I was. Sorry. Hannah, thank you also for your comments. That was really great. I love you guys. Thanks.
Bye, Leon.
Well, thank you for that insight, Leona. And membrane also is a filter which permits things to pass through. Mm-hmm. So on that note, Dorit and I curated a group of artworks from works by Jewish Art Salon members that we feel kind of really relate to Paul's ideas. And the comments on the slides are our own comments. So Dorit, please go ahead and share the gallery.
Yeah, sure. First, I would like to thank you, Paul. That was very interesting. And I also enjoyed very much the comments by everybody. So interpretation was very abstract. And so I hope it's going to create some conversation. Briefly, we're going to go through some artists that we choose to present here now. So Yona Verwer's piece reminds us of tectonic plates forming the earth for the first time as described in Genesis. Okay, so ice forms. This is a work by Ellen Alt. Ice forms relates visually to geodesy, oceanic forms, the heavenly Big Bang. Ellen Hobschit. This is a piece called Wadi Rum in the Valley of the Moon in Jordan, a place that is sculptured by the winds of nature and marked by the human hand with ancient inscriptions. Myrta Kupferning, the metaphysically perfect spiral from the shell becomes a metaphor for the spooling out of the human story. Marcus uses recycled material to create an exhausted human being. Paper is transit, will biodegrade like the body. The bridge between nature and culture, ancient stones impress a story upon us as we will press our lips to the stones with a prayer. We see the span of human life as a collection of little artifacts, sheltered here in pockets dyed the color of the sea. Two men who ground lenses, Spinoza brought science into spirituality. Van Lee Van Hook used his lenses to view and describe a microscopic world for the first time in human history. Science gives us access to view microscopic life forms, art and culture, lend them aesthetics and context. Schechter's works remind us of Edison's lab. He presents science versus fate, as humans struggle with water shortage and other environmental occurrence. These shoes were created to root her, Bet Kerensky, being to the earth deeply and securely. The evolution of humanity after the destruction and rebuilding until the next nuclear war in a sort of tragic cycle of self-destruction. So you're all welcome to make the connection. And here we go.
I just want to say that there are so many ideas brought up in this presentation. I'm going to want to watch it again. And we record all of these programs, and they're all available on YouTube if you just do a search on the Jewish Art Salon. So if you, like me, want to revisit some of these ideas, you can do that there. But while we're all here together, if you have comments, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to hear Paul Salmon. What do you think if the connection, did you find a connection between the slideshow?
I think they were amazing. You know, I would have liked to spend more time gazing at them, but I mean, almost at the first one, there was that one Life as Foam that had a big seashell form that connected for me. Soon after, there was a human body kind of made out of twisted paper. You know, the fragility, but the strength of a human being expressed with paper. And that came up before when Leona talked about parchment in that guy's Ronit's Wailing Wall Kisses, you know, because I was just at the Kotel recently, you know, people kiss the stone, and she's created a visual way of encapsulating that. I could go on. Hannah, I see your hand is up. And then we have a couple other people who haven't spoken before.
Thank you. That was such a, I as well feel like I could have seen those images. I would have loved to have seen them for a little bit longer, but as well, I was really intrigued by the shell and this notion of Fibonacci series, right? This formula or code that really generates whole worlds, and it also it struck me that we are one of the only beings that seems to have such a struggle with understanding how we connect, right? Where we connect. We just constantly are struggling to find it, whether it's going to be outside and understanding where we connect in the universe, or something as tangible and physical as having the roots, or yes, that very first image, of course, you know, very directly from the Torah, made me think of the earth opening up, right, and swallowing an entire family, right? And they're screaming, their breath coming out from in the earth. And then this image from the kotel, and again, the lipstick, well, so for me, it was more about the breath. We're always using breath, and breath is what created in the very first creation, right? It's the breath. And just all of them for me, again, really went back to this idea of how do we understand boundaries, which I know that Paul brought up earlier, this notion of boundaries. Where do I begin? Where do you begin? Is there some boundary there, and how do we define it? And it just looks to me like, you know, in each of these works, that's the thread. How do we define ourselves, you know, in the world, in relation to the world? They're really beautiful pieces.
Dan.
Yeah, hi, Dorit.
Hi, Dan.
Can you show your piece again on the screen? Okay, I really like it. I think it's very good.
This is Michigan Avenue in Chicago, right after the looting of the stores. At COVID time, the gangs were just destroying Michigan Avenue, and it looked like apocalypse to me. This is Magnificent Mile. In you know, in all sci-fi and science, they say that roach will survive after human will be destroyed. So
right,
I use them in I have this series about the roaches occupying the world.
I think that's very smart.
I visited there really during COVID at the beginning, and all the Michigan Avenue was really looted, and also this north side too. And I see Chicago people here are banging their heads.
I think the art using cockroaches is very powerful. It's a very good piece. Thank you for showing it.
There's another question about your image. Why use Marilyn Monroe in the image? I think she was on the building, right?
Marilyn Monroe was actually, it was painted on the building, or it was a big banner, probably from the Modern Contemporary Art Museum that was stayed there. And I find it really constructed by the culture that also was stopped at that time, and it was in my photo. So I really chose this one to be presented.
I love the juxtaposition between that kind of icon of culture and the cockroach.
Okay, while we're waiting for more questions or comments, I would also like to thank the two other team members who have helped put this together. Ghana Wiesenthal Elias, who's been speaking, and also Cheselyn Amato. Thank you both.
Thank you. So Dorit, I just want to add that what I appreciate about the image, and is it possible to bring it back up once more? What I just really appreciate about the choice of images and the juxtaposition. So, you know, both cockroaches and Marilyn, right, have this endless replication. I mean, for Warhol, right, the being in the age of mechanical reproduction and being able to produce these lithographs and have them become such an icon, you know, and then using this roach as well, it kind of implies on some level that in the post-apocalyptic world, that which remains is that which is most easily reproducible. And, you know, so I find this image really to be very interesting and provocative. As for the other image and kind of what I perceived as Dan's pushing a little bit on the issue of, I guess, the content maybe not matching his experience or what's viewed in the world as being the, you know, the objective experience, I would push back and I would say, hey, we're here and this is about inventing the world. And that's what we do as artists. We actually bring to I mean, we're not documenting the world as a journalistic documentation necessarily, right? So there I would say that Dorit was completely within the realm of the process in incorporating an image that struck her as being visually implying what she needed for her vocabulary.
Thank you very much, Hannah, for your words. Always so inspiring and interesting. So I guess if there are no more questions, anybody, if you have questions at the time. If not, I would like to say thank you for Hannah and Chesley Nameto, and of course, Yona and Judith. And thank you so much, Paul, for your presentation. It was fascinating. And so we want to thank also Canvas to support this program. And we are working on the next program, and we will be posting everything very soon to you all. So have a continuing of a nice day. By me, finally, I'm on the correct time in New York. So it's not 7 in the evening in Jerusalem. So this is cool.
Thank you, everyone, especially Paul. Your presentation was brilliant. And I really appreciated all the comments by all the members of the Art Salon and visitors. So we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks so much.